Today, not only am I testing and reviewing this sexy Gyuto from prominent Canadian knifesmith Hudson Torrens, but we are testing a brand new, promising steel to the kitchen knife world. Pop's ProCut steel. Will it be a steel worth investing in? Continue to watch to find out. Now, let's go meet Hudson to see who he is, what he sent us, and when we come back, I'll introduce the steel before we unbox, test, and review what Hudson sent us.
Hey everyone, my name is Hudson Torrens. I'm a Canadian bladesmith, and I've been doing this full-time for about 2 years now. I specialize in culinary knives. I've sent in to Frankie a ProCut Gyuto, which I'm very excited about. This is a new steel. Seems pretty promising. Excited to see how the edge retention and everything holds up. You can find me and my knives. My Instagram is at handmade.by.hudson. My YouTube is Hudson Torrens, and my website is Hudson Torrens Knives. Thank you.
There you have it, everybody. Hudson Torrens, a Canadian knifesmith just 3 hours south of where I live, and one hell of a passionate individual to his craft. He spent the last year traveling quite a bit to meet the makers in this crazy kitchen knife world, partaking in knife shows like Knife Show Austria and, of course, the famous Atlanta Blade Show. Now about Pop's ProCut. It is a new kitchen knife steel developed by Dr. Larrin Thomas, the same metallurgist wizard behind MagnaCut and one of the co-founders of Apex Ultra, one of my all-time favorite steels. Dr. Thomas has a whole in-depth video about Pop's ProCut. I'll link it in the video description below, so I won't dive too deep into it, but there are a few things I really want you to know about Pop's ProCut. As a scientist myself, and someone who appreciates numbers, I'm putting a few figures on screen from his website so you can see how it compares to other popular kitchen knife steels like Apex Ultra and Eogami Super. Pop's ProCut is a low alloy carbon steel advertised as being a good balance of wear resistance and toughness. Tougher than Eogami Super and a more affordable option to Apex Ultra. You can already see where it's starting to fit in. It is designed to be knife maker friendly in terms of forge, grind, finish, and polish, something Apex Ultra lacks in terms of beginner friendly. And lastly, for those that like to forge weld their own Damascus, this is supposed to be a great steel for that bright layer with its high nickel content. Well, enough talk. Let's see and test what Hudson sent us. In terms of the unboxing and the packaging, I love how minimal it all was. Box just large enough for the packaging just large enough for the knife. Maybe an unpopular opinion, but knife boxes are overrated unless that's where you store your knives, which is better than in a drawer with the blade unsheathed. So, to the knife makers out there, just personally and honestly, unless you're selling a super unique knife or a $1,000+ knife and the box is part of the experience, kind of like Hado does, don't stress. I'd rather this type of packaging than a failed knife box. The cardboard psyop is always a classy move. One thing I will say is on the first try removing the knife, I didn't see the little itsy bitsy staple keeping the cardboard sheet shut. Now I know knives aren't delicate flowers, like me, but there always exists a risk for potential damage to the knife, on the finish if anything else. I'd remediate this with a piece of painter's tape instead of a staple. Less classy, but does the job and highly visible. Hudson's handle work is really incredible. First thing I noticed is just how smooth the handle was. Absolutely seamless transition from the African Blackwood to the Coco Bolo. I cannot feel the transition at all from the two distinct woods. Then I noticed just how sleek the handle is. A octagonal handle, yes, but very narrow in terms of the width, which my small hands appreciated. The butt of the handle is also slightly chamfered and fluted, which is a very nice touch. And then the pièce de résistance, the textures in this blade. Super thick forged scale with lots going on, almost an in-between Kurochi and the Shiji finish. All my eyes could see were peninsulas and water. Very, very cool. The super thick forged scale is contrasted by the deep hollows throughout the blade, creating, all in all, a super interesting topography. Very tight, adequately sized maker's mark, not in your face and not too subtle, just the perfect size and placement. Speaking of the maker's mark, he's one of the few smiths I know to place it on the left side of the blade. 95% of my Japanese kitchen knives have the maker's mark on the right side of the blade, with a notable exception being Takeda Sans knives. And I've always wondered why this choice. So Hudson, if you're watching, and I hope you do, I'd love to know in the comments, why left side versus right side? On one side, see what I did there? When it's on the left, I see the maker's mark as I use it. On the downside, when I put it up on my knife bar with all the other maker's mark on the right side and people come in, well, they don't get to see a maker's mark. Anywho, I beat that one to a pulp. Enough about that. The profile of this knife is absolutely stunning and aggressive. It really reminds me of a certain maker I will mention at the end of the video. Super steep slope decrease in blade profile from heel to tip with a generous belly height at heel. Very nicely rounded and polished spine and heel. Super thin edge by the looks of the choil. Nail flexing thin tip. Honestly, so far, I'm thinking this is a fantastic knife for 600 Canadian dollars. But of course, if the performance disappoints, then none of this matters. Let's check out how this knife did, as well as figure out how we like Pop's ProCut. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and turn on those notifications so you know when the next video is up. The quick and dirty, I 100% would recommend this knife. Now, time for the details. About the knife. You know, we had to start with the classic cherry tomato test. For me, it gives me an idea of how much bite the edge has, and typically I like a lot of bite because I cut them tomatoes a lot. As you can see, the edge on this Gyuto has enough bite for a cherry tomato. Not the tootiest, but definitely tooty enough, so likely above a 1K grit finish. Even lateral cuts through the tomato were no issue. How about lateral cuts through a shallot? Easy work. Super thin edge on this knife. In particular, the tip, which almost sings like a katana when drawing back. Dicing a shallot was child's play. Makes this a great knife for when I'm making risotto and aiming to dice as small as a grain of rice. Now, on a knife with a blue number 1 or even Aogomi super coarse steel with a tip this thin, I might be worried about tip stability. So who knows, maybe this is the toughness of Pop's ProCut at play. Hard to tell, but let's keep it in mind. Of course, some of you might be thinking, it's easy, Frankie, to make a lateral cut through a shallot, try a large onion. Fine, John Smith, I will. Sure, it wasn't as smooth as a shallot, but it isn't because the knife isn't sharp or isn't thin. It's very much both those things. It's likely due to the drag behind this much belly height on a profile with a polished edge, which adds to the stick factor. Speaking of the polished edge adding to the stick, you can see that in action here, even with pull cuts on a russet potato. A pull cut utilizes the smallest surface area of the knife to slice, and so if the food sticks, then you know it's likely due to the polish over an issue with the user's technique. No biggie, of course, just an observation. Though this is a monosteel constructed blade, would be epic to see the same blade but with a kasumi finish to decrease suction from food. At the same time, as the blade eventually patinas, and it will, it should decrease the food suction ratio. Food release aside, again, look at how sharp this knife is. Super easy to drag horizontally across this potato. The good old carrot test demonstrates just how thin this knife is from edge to spine. Smooth even on a slow cut. The way it glides here, I'd reckon the edge was sharpened above 1K, but under 3K. But what do I know? A quick celery test just shows how effortlessly it cuts through the fibers. With fibers quite literally going through the celery, you can tell if a super toothy edge snaps the fibers or glides through. So this edge was toothy enough to pierce the skin of the cherry tomato effortlessly, but polished enough to cut the fibers from the celery. Even though this belly profile has quite a dramatic swoop, I wanted to try rock chopping on green onions. Also a good test of how stable this thin edge feels and how flat it sits on the cutting board. No issues with how the edge felt on the board, and though I wasn't a fan of the feeling of rock chopping with it, I think what's to blame is more how thin and sharp it is, making the Parker Asahi board feel sticky as it digs in. I ran into the same issue trying to rock chop with my ultra thin Hado, which in many ways has a similar profile to this knife and thinness behind the edge. which is a great compliment, Hudson, by the way. Given this blade didn't seem to patina at all initially, I tried to force it by supreming a juicy orange. I even put the blade down for a few seconds between cuts, and I must say, I really expected something to just show up. So clearly the corrosion resistance on this Pops ProCut steel is quite high. However, I continued to use it and test it after this video to see what patina might look like. So here it is to my left 3 days later and a week later. It definitely does patina, but buildup is slow and rather low contrast. Again, just an observation, which matters if you're a patina lover or maybe just the opposite. All in all, this steel really reminded me of the performance of my Takamura chrome racks with the same type of initial shallow grays and blacks appearing as patina. Unlike Chromax, again, for how thin this edge is, I was really impressed with how stable the edge felt under my hands. I may need to even try it on a butternut squash with proper technique just to see how it feels. After a week of non-stop go-to knife use, no stropping, the knife felt nearly just as sharp out of the box. At this point, I can say with a fairly high level of confidence that the steel feels tough. I put it through the paces and was impressed with the outcome. In terms of my nitpicks, my biggest gripe with this knife would simply be the polish. A little uneven in the deep visible scratch pattern, also leading probably to a higher suction surface. Now, if you'll remember at the beginning of the video, I gloated about the thinner shaped octagonal wah handle. But in use, I'll admit, I wish there was just a little bit more weight towards the blade neck or the handle. Felt slightly tip heavy. A denser wood with the same handle construction could absolutely remedy this. By the way, have you heard of the legendary Benjamin Camon? Well, if you have, I'm telling you, Hudson is following in his footsteps. The blade profile, the blade textures and denty-like hollows. Trust me, if you haven't heard of him until now, you're welcome. Get one of his knives now before, like so many others, he eventually asks you to patiently wait a year before working on a custom for you. This knife is super reasonably priced for what it is. An absolutely astonishing attention to detail on fit and finish. Super attractive package, this is a home run. As for Pops ProCut, hard to critique edge longevity, so I'll keep an eye on that as I use it more and report back on IG over time. I'll likely also sharpen the knife to see how quickly a burr forms. Definitely though, I can say great corrosion resistance, the ability to be made very thin and sharp, and even at a HRC of 64 feels hella tough. Thanks Hudson for this awesome knife. Dr. Thomas, I think the steel is going to quickly become a favorite among smiths, and personally, I can't wait to see more of it in Damascus to see how bright it can get. Thanks for watching, see you next time.